I decided to make this video because I, a man, found myself lost in regards to whether I should get married. I don't believe this problem is unique to myself. Many modern men are confused about how they should orient themselves in regards to marriage. Many men are lost and searching for direction. Where are these men looking for direction? They're looking on the internet. Over the last decade, several figures have emerged to supply the demand for guidance to this market of directionless men. The first of these figures is Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson is a Canadian psychologist who entered into the collective public consciousness in 2016 after he voiced opposition to a transgender rights bill in the Canadian legislature. He claimed that the bill contained language that would empower the Canadian government to compel an individual's speech, thus opening the gateway to an Orwellian dystopian future. Since then, Jordan Peterson's ideas have been widely disseminated through his public lectures, books, and innumerable video clips that now populate YouTube. His focus on the development of the individual and the importance of personal responsibility have been particularly popular among young men. He has served as the internet father for a generation of lost men. He identifies as a classic British liberal. He thinks men should get married. The second figure, and the foil to Jordan Peterson, is not a singular figure at all, but rather a group of loosely related individuals that compose a domain of thought referred to as the manosphere. It's difficult to provide a summary of the ideas that characterize the manosphere because the space is so heterogeneous. However, there is a theme that all manosphere creators relate to in some capacity, a common thread that aligns them. It's a theme that makes the space distinct from any other public forum. The manosphere discusses the negative behaviors of women. Examples of these negative behaviors include false accusations of rape and harassment, reputation destruction using social media, and financial extortion through the use of the family court system. The manosphere also highlights the experiences of men who have suffered the consequences of these negative behaviors. Manosphere creators will often cite statistics to support their concerns. For example, that the overall divorce rate in the United States is high at 50%, and that the majority of divorces are initiated by women. The majority of alimony payments are paid from men to women, as is the majority of child support. Women also obtain primary custody of children in the majority of divorce situations. Manosphere creators see all of these statistics and use them to build their case that in Western countries, family court and even relationships with women more generally are rigged games that exploit men and should be viewed with contempt and suspicion. In order to mitigate these risks, many manosphere creators advise for men to limit their relationships with women in some capacity. This can include avoiding long-term relationships with women, avoiding cohabitation, and most prominently, avoiding marriage. It's this last bit that will serve as the meat of this video because it's what I consider to be the central conflict between Jordan Peterson and the manosphere, and why for those who listen to both, it feels as if they're standing at a crossroads when it comes to their own life. Should they go MGTOW and opt out of the system, focus on building themselves up and making themselves as independent as possible? Or should they find some way to still pursue the path of marriage, even knowing its possible risks and high likelihood of failure? To begin, I'll play a clip of Dr. Peterson. It's one of the earliest moments in which Jordan Peterson and the manosphere cross paths.
There's a whole group online called Men Going Their Own Way, MGTOW. It's a very interesting group to go study. There's lots of them. I don't know how many of them there are, and most of them are older. Many of them are men who've been through a particularly horrifying divorce for one reason or another, and they've had enough of women. So they tell the young men that they're teaching, never have a permanent relationship, never share your territory with a woman, never share your possessions, make sure you never live together, and don't stay with one long enough to enter a common law relationship, because you will be stripped of everything that you have. And it's not all women, that's for sure. I don't want to have anything to do with women. It's like you're a pathetic weasel. That's the same statement.
Jordan Peterson refers to MGTOW, men going their own way, as pathetic weasels. The reason he disparages them is because he views them as men who have given up. Like Cain in Cain and Abel, they are blaming God for their failures with women, rather than asking themselves if they're making the proper sacrifices. Jordan Peterson is pretty critical of MGTOW at first, and he doesn't consider that the motivation behind their philosophy towards marriage might have some merit. You might say that Jordan Peterson is just ignorant of the reality of family court in the United States. He just pays attention to other topics. And this is what I used to think. It's just not on his radar. He himself has been married to his first and only wife for decades. However, just saying Jordan Peterson is ignorant of the realities of family court doesn't seem to be the case. With the rise of the internet, there are myriad stories you can discover of men being subjected to the bias of family court and the police. One of the best and most harrowing comes from Jordan Peterson's own podcast.
And she had called the police on this particular day, March 5th, 2015, and she'd asked them to come to the house. I'd actually taken the afternoon off. I was at home with my sons, playing in the playroom with them. And she asked them to come to the house and said that I was confused. And the dispatch said, we can't go to the house if he's confused. She said, well, what do you need to hear? And they said, we need to hear he's a threat to himself or the children. And then allegedly sometime later, I think 45 seconds later, she called them back and said, she said, my husband's just told me, quote, I'm sick of this shit. I'm gonna harm the children.
For an hour and a half, Jordan Peterson listened to this man describe in excruciating detail the harrowing tale of being locked up and nearly driven to suicide by a system of corrupt laws, lawyers, judges, and police officers. Besides being a podcast host, Jordan Peterson used to practice as a clinical psychologist. He's counseled men in a clinical setting who are going through divorce. He recalls how these male clients were being demolished during a divorce, even though they didn't deserve it, and there was nothing he, as their psychologist, could do to help them. Given these experiences, you can't say Jordan Peterson is ignorant to the realities of modern family court. He's not. It seems that Peterson later realized how his judgment of MGTOW was premature and overly dismissive. That's why, in another interview, he later goes on to recant his statement regarding MGTOW and further clarify his thinking.
Is there a concrete example of something where you said something, and I'm not thinking of anything in particular, I'm being entirely genuine here. Is there an instance where you feel you said something that appeared to be true to you at the time? And knowing what you know.
Yes, I think I was a little dismissive of the men going their own way, because I think I called them pathetic weasels, and I had my reasons for that. Now, the reason I regret calling them pathetic weasels is because they also have a point. I do believe that the court systems are staggeringly anti-male, absurdly, horribly anti-male, and I've seen my own clients, some of them who are really, really decent, hardworking, family-oriented people, demolished by the court systems. And so the men going their own way have a point.
He acknowledges that family court in the United States is corrupted and biased against men. It seems for a moment that Jordan Peterson and the manosphere are on the same side. They think men should walk the same road. However, this is definitely not the case. Unlike many manosphere creators, Jordan Peterson still thinks men should get married, despite the fact that he acknowledges the corruption of family court. It's strange that Dr. Peterson, despite openly admitting that the family court system in Western countries is corrupt beyond all belief, he would still advocate for men and women to utilize it. It's almost like he's saying, just go forward and throw yourself willingly into the meat grinder. It's especially strange considering Dr. Peterson feels many other institutions of modern Western society have become corrupted. For example, he feels that the institution of higher education is so corrupt that it should essentially be torn to the ground. Peterson is gung-ho about telling people to abandon the institution of higher education because it's corrupt, and yet he does not call for people to abandon the institution of marriage, even though he also believes it's corrupt. Jordan Peterson later went on the Roommates podcast. I remember grinning when I saw this episode come up because it was the episode myself and I suspect many other men had been waiting for. If there was any time Jordan Peterson was going to be challenged to flesh out his views regarding the contradiction of modern marriage, it was this one. However, the podcast ultimately amounted to the same points with little further development. Dr. Peterson talked about how men need to man up, dress well, and that was the solution. He focused on how men need to fix themselves and that this is the solution to their relationship problems. However, he never discusses the problem of marriage and family court. I was disappointed because I thought the host, Hafiz, was a bit starstruck during the interview. He pushed a little bit, but I think he allowed his own admiration of Dr. Peterson to prevent him from going far enough. I wish Hafiz would have investigated Dr. Peterson's thoughts about how men should resolve the conflict between wanting to get married and exposing themselves to a system that he himself has already admitted he thinks is corrupt. Maybe Jordan Peterson feels marriage is so important, he doesn't care about the corrupt family courts. He believes that by seeing marriage through the lens of Christianity, marriage takes on a sort of metaphysical or transcendent quality. It becomes not only a shelter for you and your spouse as individuals, but it's the proper environment within which to raise children. By extension, a functional marriage then gives rise to a functional and prosperous society. Proper marriage, then, is greater than the sum of its parts. Maybe Jordan Peterson is not willing to go so far as to tell people to abandon marriage because he thinks the institution is so critical to the stability of society that, despite its current level of corruption, people should still engage it. Even though some people will be destroyed by it, ultimately, it's for the good of society. This leads to the crux of the problem, the contradiction paralyzing men in their tracks. Do men orient themselves towards marriage or not? It's a significant decision, and it's even more difficult if the man wants children. So men want to get married, and yet in doing so, risk exposing themselves to the perils of the corrupt family court system. In order to practice the idealistic spiritual marriage Jordan Peterson talks about, they have to expose themselves to the legal system that the manosphere warns about. When deciding how to orient oneself in this domain, Jordan Peterson seems to represent one path. Marriage is not only beneficial, it's mandatory to a man's well-being. Moreover, a functioning family unit maintains the order of a society and allows for its functioning. The family court system is corrupt, but a life without an intimate partner or children is destined for loneliness and meaninglessness. To adopt this position also dooms society in the long run. Thus, to open yourself up to the risk of the legal system is the lesser of the two evils. Jordan Peterson thinks you should get married despite the risks. The manosphere resolves this problem in the opposite direction. There's a spectrum of proposed pathways that various content creators in the manosphere have generated. Some suggest never marrying. Some will say to never cohabitate with women. Some think that men should never get romantically involved with women at all. Many manosphere creators would agree that their primary issue isn't with women, it's with the family court system, a system that they view as biased, unfair, and corrupt. What path you take is, of course, up to you. If you live in the United States, keep in mind that marriage and divorce laws vary between states. Maybe with enough research, you can find a state with laws that you agree with. Consider working out a prenuptial agreement as well. Consider also that people can have successful long-term relationships without being married. You can still make a lifelong commitment to someone without signing a legal contract. Regarding Jordan Peterson, what I would like to see from him is for him to clarify his position on the family court system. Does he believe the system is in need of reform or not? If he does, which I imagine he does, I think someone like him would have pretty interesting ideas of how to do that and change marriage into an institution that people would like to participate in instead of trying to avoid. If you have any other thoughts, let me know in the comments below. Thanks.